So I am Peter Bucksbaum, retired Superior Court judge and serving the role of moderator. Joining us on the panel are Senator Troy Singleton, the author of this fantastic piece of legislation that I think will amazes New Jersey and will amaze the country. And I'm speaking on it at an international conference in Wales in a few months. It's that important. Adam Gordon from the Fair Share Housing Center, which has been it's so important that the Supreme Court of New Jersey said they have to be in every case. That has never happened in the court system, that one public interest group has been cited that you are automatically in every case. So, and Adam is a driving force behind the statute. And Valerie Haynes, who reminded me she was a former deputy attorney general. And now, as a civilian, she's been running the Princeton effort, which is the flip side of the law, which is how you implement them, how you make things actually happen. Because as the court said, courts don't build houses, but we can enforce the Constitution. But it's people like Valerie that see that the houses are actually getting built. And if you have a quick question as to why 3 synagogues are putting this in, pardon my Hebrew, you love your neighbor as yourself. There's a rabbi here. I hope she wasn't too offended by that. Okay. All right. And I'd like you to say hello to Rabbi.
Hi, I want to welcome everyone here. I'm Rabbi Andrea Mero. We want to welcome all of you, and especially our sister congregations. Welcome Adam back to his home congregation, where he became bar mitzvah. And we actually got to hear him speak a few weeks ago on Sukkot. But we're excited to have all of you. When you come into a synagogue, you often say the words, Ma tohu ohalecha. How good is our house? How good is our tent? How good is our dwelling place? And wouldn't it be incredible if everyone were able to say, how good is our dwelling? Every single person created in God's image. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. Welcome to the Jewish Center.
Thank you. Okay, having given the brief introductions, it's time for your moderator to keep quiet and to turn the discussion over to the people, these stellar individuals we've invited to speak. And there are 2 questions we wanted to start out with. Addressed mainly to Senator Singleton, but anyone on the panel could also respond. Why did the legislature decide to act after 15 years of nothing at all and almost 10 years of court supervision? What changed that this monumental statute suddenly was adopted after 25 years of either nothing in the legislature or action only from the courts? And then the second question that I think we need to start with is, what are the aims of the statute? What are the hopes of the senator and his colleagues in getting it passed? What are Adam's hopes in seeing that it's implemented? And how will Valerie run with it? So with that, I'd like to call on Senator Singleton first. I would mention his time is limited to 6:45, as I recall. So if he should leave, it's not because he doesn't like us. And we also put him on the end there so he won't trip over we want to make sure he gets out safely. With that, I'll turn it over to start Senator Singleton, and then the panelists can join in.
Hello.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah.
Hello. There we go. Thank you. I feel bad. I wasn't technically savvy, and that's already a bad start. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and privilege to be with you. Would it be better if I stood up? For those in the back, would that make it easier? Sure. So again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those who do not know me, my name is Troy Singleton. I have the honor and privilege of representing the 7th Legislative District, which is in Burlington County. So if those are familiar with Burlington County, I represent every community from Bordertown Township down Route 130 to Palmyra, inclusive of Morristown and Mount Laurel. So roughly around about 240, 250,000 people. So I have a lot of bosses, as they say. The question was asked, like, why does it take the legislature too long to enact this? And I think there's a couple key things that I would start out around that conversation.
Excuse me, kind of, people on Zoom that can't see you, can you stand behind your chair? Thank you.
A lot of cues here. God love it. So I think there's a couple pieces I would say as to why it took the legislature too long. First of all, is frankly leadership in the governor's office. Under former Governor Christie, the idea of affordable housing was not something he embraced, and frankly wasn't something he had a whole lot of interest in trying to address. Is why the Council on Affordable Housing became functionally defunct in this operation, because Governor Christie saw no desire to do it. And as many people in this room know, and those in the virtual land will know as well, affordable housing sometimes gets painted with this broad brush as a boogeyman for a lot of things, a lot of fears. It's designed to stoke up those fears, oftentimes to separate us, right? I think the great comment that His Honor made was talking about loving thy neighbor. And I think affordable housing in this connotation, people have this imagery of what they think it is. And that imagery sort of scares some people to have inaction, frankly. The second part I would tell you about why it took so long is something I talk about with a lot of legislation. I've had the privilege of doing some pretty cool landmark things, and everything has a season in Trenton and government. And sometimes it takes other factors around for you to get to that season to be able to move public policy forward. Now, in this instance, we are facing a July 2025 deadline for the next round of affordable housing decisions. And we wanted to make sure that all the action that Adam and so many others have led the fight on in the legal system was codified in statute to give us a blueprint so we don't have to keep running to the courts, no disrespect, Your Honor, to sort of make the decisions that frankly policymakers should make. So the season became upon us when we had a confluence of a lot of different factors. That deadline that was in front of us, and frankly, the desire for those of us, I serve as chairman of the Senate Community and Urban Affairs Committee, where all housing policy in the New Jersey State Senate originates, to say we have this unique opportunity to bring the right voices to the table to try and move us beyond talking at one another and sort of working together. Now, the challenge you have is that sometimes input doesn't always mean that that's the decision you're going to make. So, and I say that because I go to great lengths to ensure I have a lot of input into making decisions. Just because one has considered your input, and I tell this to my children all the time, doesn't mean you're guaranteed that the decision is going to be the way you want it. And that was part of our journey to go through this, right? Adam and I had to talk through pieces that we didn't always agree upon. And we found a way to figure out, like, this is how we can thread this needle. And it is threading the needle, right? You have suburban folks in certain communities who will tell you, I don't want to destroy the fabric of my community, which is a fancy way of saying, I don't want those people to live next door to me, right? And then you have a whole host of other folks who sit there and are just willfully ignorant to the idea that if we create a wide span of housing at every level, the more inventory we create, you also put downward pressure on pricing. And that helps everybody across the spectrum. Now, being in the legislature is a part-time job. My daytime job is in real estate. I've run title companies all across this country for a Fortune 500 company called Anywhere Real Estate, which no one has ever heard of. But you've heard of all our brands: Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Corcoran, Sotheby's, ERA, Better Homes and Gardens. We own all those brands, and we own the title companies, 26 of them in 40 states around the country. And we are obligated to try and understand how we can create more housing opportunity. So our goal with this legislation was to do exactly that. There's a dearth of housing in our state. I think one of the stories I saw said that is sometimes when an apartment goes up, for every time an apartment opens up, I think it was 14 or so people are applying for an application immediately the day apartment goes up. That's just an apartment. That's not even talking about our housing stock being depressed and what more that we can do. We believe, and I fundamentally believe this, the more we can do to create a true microcosm of our state where everybody can live, work, and play throughout our state, not only enhances our community benefit for each other, but it does do exactly what I said, creates more housing inventory, which in turn lowers pricing and costs for us all. Now, that is the sort of why behind how we did this and why we did it. And frankly, it was the season that was upon us that allowed it to happen. But it became honestly because of advocates like Adam, and I wouldn't say this, he didn't pay me because I'm in his home synagogue, but he and so many other incredible advocates who do this work every day. Like I do a myriad of issues, and this was a big one, and I focused on it, but I'll be on to my next issue once we pass this. He lives and breathes housing every day. He lives and breathes making sure that everyone has an opportunity to live their best version of the American dream in this great state that we call New Jersey. So he's been a partner for a long time and a lot of positive things, but it was so many people like that who helped us get across the finish line when we were struggling, trying to find votes. We say in Trenton, and I'll end on this point, there are only 3 numbers that matter in Trenton: 21, 41, and 1. Because it takes 21 senators, 41 assembly members, and 1 governor to make something happen. We could have not achieved that if it were not for the work of Adam Gordon and the countless other advocates who are citizen legislators who don't get a vote, but who had enough fight to make sure we were able to get to the finish line. So that's how our process works, and we were pretty excited to get this one done and on to the next challenge that we face.
Thank you very much. Okay, ask those same questions of Adam now, with the caveat that there are 2 things you should never see being made: sausage and legislation. Why don't you tell us about it?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing. Well, first, thank you, Senator Singleton, for those kind of words, which mean a tremendous amount coming from you. And Senator Singleton has just been a tremendous leader and partner in so much of the work that we and so many other people who are trying to change the state for the better have done. Trenton. And I really appreciate, it's great to be here. My mom's in the audience, obviously, the memory of, for those of you who are members here of my father, of blessed memory, who did so much to build this community is strong. And yes, I did grow up here, and I was the first bar mitzvah that Rabbi Elkins did, which was a long time ago. Several rabbis before Rabbi Meron, and it's great to be back here. How did this get done? I mean, a tremendous amount of it is leadership, and especially Senator Singleton's leadership. Trenton it's a challenging place to navigate, and Senator Singleton, what he just said about the legislature should set policy on this, he's been saying for probably 7-8 years now, in many ways, probably beyond. I mean, I first met Senator Singleton when he was a staff person for the former Speaker of the New Jersey Assembly, Joe Roberts, and just the central staff person working to make sure that we got legislation to ban the former practice that towns could pay out of their obligations to get that ban. And he has been devoted to making sure this works ever since. And it really is pretty incredible. And I think another factor in why this happened and how, if you had told people, our organization is 50 years old next year. It's 50 years since the original Mount Laurel decision. The people who brought this case from the NAACP in Burlington County, leaders like Ethel Lawrence, that is all that happened a long time ago. And if you had told the people who started this that someday the state senator representing Mount Laurel would lead the fight for a landmark law to implement it, it would have stunned them. But I think it speaks to some of the things the senator talked about, and a couple more that I'll add. I think that there's a lot of communities like Mount Laurel, which was the epicenter of it, where people said all kinds of things that the sky was going to fall, and then they actually did what they were supposed to do, and it actually strengthened the community. I mean, Mount Laurel, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's a great community to live in, and it's a great community to live in precisely because it has created racial and economic diversity as part and maintained in many ways the diversity that was there for hundreds of years. And it has very strong schools. It's a major job center. And it's really a great place, and affordable housing has been a key part of making and keeping it a great place. And I think there's a lot of places that have had that experience, and so, you know, certainly not all, couple, there's definitely a lot of places that are resisting it. But there's more of an opportunity and a bunch of people who say, actually, this works. We know it works. And that has changed the political calculus around it. I also would say that, you know, we've gotten past, I mean, I think the senator is absolutely right. I mean, Governor Christie tried to, he ran on a platform of gutting Mount Laurel in his own words, and he failed. And he failed because the legislature and legislators like Senator Singleton stood up, because tremendous organizing by, and the senator's right, an incredible coalition of housing advocates, planning advocates, pastors and other rabbis, imams, and many other people who are invested in this work. And I think that then the question became, do we continue with the kind of the ad hoc system that had been patched together by the courts when Governor Christie refused to implement the law, or do we actually chart positive policy and do something different? And you know, I do think the default a lot of times in our society is that the legislators don't tackle issues that are challenging. I think that framing, we have to do something, and the leadership of Senator Singleton and the other key sponsors of this bill, Assemblywoman Lopez, and the two, Speaker Coughlin, the Senate President, sorry, we really recognized we had to do something, and once there was a decision that we needed to do something, it then became those often very hard negotiations over what it was to do. But getting to that point is often very challenging and something that legislators, you know, shy away from, especially on complex issues. And I really, again, we'll circle back to where I started. If we hadn't had the leadership of Senator Singleton saying that we had to tackle this issue, we wouldn't be here talking about this stuff.
Brief aside, I read a magazine article not too long ago, which Mount Laurel, which fought affordable housing so severely that the Supreme Court called it true to nothing but its desire to exclude in 1985. But in this more recent publication, Mount Laurel was considered to be the 16th most desirable community in the country because of its diversity. So that's an amazing turnaround. And I'm going to call on Valerie to talk about what the statute means for Princeton and how it spurs you onward. When I say Princeton, I mean the entire, it's not just Princeton here.
That's right. I know that there are other synagogues who are here representing other towns. So let me just start quickly by saying what Princeton Community Housing is, because I'm sure you don't all know. Those of you who live here, maybe I hope you do know. It's an organization that was started back actually just a little before Mount Laurel by people in the Princeton community who realized that Princeton was becoming unaffordable to many of the people who historically had lived here, who had worked here in the university and the other nonprofits, who worked for the schools, worked for the government, were involved in our community, were essential to keeping the community thriving. And they did not want to see that happen. So they were trying to think of how to avoid that. And they formed an organization bringing together many faith communities, including the Jewish Center, bringing together the university, the institute, the theological seminary, other groups like the Teachers Union, the League of Women Voters. All of these organizations came together, and all of these people joined together and said, what can we do about this? And the first project that they were able to create was called Princeton Community Village. It's on Bun Drive. There are over 200 households living there today, 50 years later, a little more than 50 years, I guess, because it opened maybe about the same time as the court was deciding Malvern. And it's a thriving community. It's a beautiful community. People like living there. I think there are families who are there now who moved in the beginning and have never left. It's a place that people want to be. And so that was the first project. The second one was was Elm Court Harry Bryan and later Harry Bryan House, which are senior citizen homes for low and very low income people on Elm Road. And then we have Griggs Farm, which was the first inclusionary development in Princeton. And has 140 market rate homes as well as 140 affordable homes, some owner occupied and some rentals. So we've accomplished a lot, but we're not done yet. We recently, last 2023. So last year we opened 25 more units at Princeton Community Village. We're now in, thank you to this law, we're now in conversations with our town about a project for round 4 that would be a reuse of a surplus municipal property, would provide 16 affordable units. It would be a 100% affordable project in the core of the town. So something that we really need. And we're looking for other options. We also, in a longer time frame, have been working with a property owner who wants to donate her home. And that home, when she's ready to donate it, will become renovated and turned into an affordable home. And we will also be able to do an accessory dwelling unit on that property, thanks to, for instance, ADU ordinance. So we'll create 2 affordable homes. Beyond that, we also have 3 other, what we call scattered site properties that are spread around town. So our role with this legislation was very minimal, but it was to just be an advocate. When we were called upon to write letters or call our representatives and let them know we supported it, we did that. I think that brings us up to where we are at this point.
Okay, thank you. Actually, there are 2 more questions to throw out before we go on. And I would mention that not only do we have people from the 3 synagogues, Bethlehem, Har Sinai, and the Jewish Center here, but we also have about the same number of people online. And we'll have to figure out how to take questions from people online.
There's
I think we
48
figured-
people online.
Okay, so, but before we get to that, and we are gonna get to questions soon. And I was asked to, when people come up with a card, we figured this group can just come up and come to the mic and ask good questions. But there are 2 more things I'd like to just throw out. DCA just came up with the proposed numbers for the state for every community. And I was wondering if particularly Adam, the senator, had a reaction to them. And then, as some of you know, a suit has been filed to block the statute. And I again wanted to see if there were any comments on that. They don't have to be long comments. You can simply say the suit's going nowhere or whatever else you might want to say. But I think it's worth people knowing that these numbers have been put out within the last week or so, and that this suit does exist. So, Senator?
So I will use the B speech on the suit, which is the Be Brief, Brother Be Brief speech. And that is simply put that lawsuit probably will not be successful. It won't be successful because of the tenets that it's built upon. We've addressed in the law. It is simply, as I said earlier, someone or a group of communities who've made a decision that they made their best argument. They lost that argument in front of sponsors, and they lost that argument when my colleagues all came to vote and are now seeking recourse and redress in the judicial system. But I firmly believe that their arguments will be struck down, and we'll get to getting on with the next part of that, which will be building the number of units that the Department of Community Affairs has outlined. They went to great lengths to use the law to help drive the methodology that was done by Judge Jacobson, who was the author of the methodology. We simply codified it with some tweaks to be reflective of the evolution of her original thought pattern. But I feel pretty confident that those numbers move us forward, both in present need and prospective need. I will tell you, we're still going to be short, right? I just want to be very clear. Even at that, we will still be short the number of units that we need. But each community now will have a defined number and a blueprint on how to get to that number. The one part, and I'll let Adam get into all the finer details, but the one part that I don't think is talked about enough, you don't necessarily have to follow the roadmap that the law says, as long as you still get to that number and stay within the guardrails of the law. And I say that because that's a very unique and distinct thing. We were not being so prescriptive that we said, hey, one size fits all, you all have to do it this way. We said you can actually do it a different way. You have to adhere to these sort of principles and make sure it falls within this bucket. And by the way, here's the number you need to get to. There are some communities that are going to say, okay, Department of Community Affairs, you're going to offer assistance for us to do it. You told us our numbers, we're going to do it. And some others think, hey, you know what? I think I can get to this number because I still want to do affordable housing. And then there's the third bucket of people who are those folks who are doing a lawsuit, who are going to be forced to do what the law has told them to do and what DCA has told them in numbers. And they're really just wasting time and their taxpayers' money. But I digress. I think that's how we'll see how this process will bear itself out. But Adam, I don't know if you wanted to add any additional color to that.
Okay. I mean, I think Senator Singleton basically said it all on both of those things. Like, it was just, we moved to intervene in the lawsuit, and don't think it has any merit, and we'll be working along with the Attorney General's office that is also defending the law to address it. I think the Senator addressed it very well. And also the Senator addressed the numbers well. The one thing I'd also add, and I don't know if something the Senator might also want to comment on, because it was a lot of what he really focused on in the law, is, one of the things that the bill really changes is how towns are incentivized to get to those numbers. There's this idea of bonus credits, that you can get extra credit if you do certain things. And historically, that was just if you did any kind of rental housing. And so that was interesting because it didn't really look at all as to where is that housing located? Are you partnering with a community-based nonprofit? Are you doing supportive housing for families experiencing homelessness or people with disabilities? Are you building housing near transit or using stranded assets like older office parks or strip malls that really need to be redeveloped? And one of the biggest things this law does is to shift the policy so that it's not just saying any rental housing gets this sort of bonus credit. There's really incentives to do all the things I just mentioned, and also incentivizes homeownership, partnering with organizations like Habitat for Humanity that are really opening up homeownership opportunities to people who haven't had them before. And so there is, as the Senator said, this blueprint and roadmap, and communities have a lot of options on how to meet it and within the law, and they're also incentivized to do things that the legislature has decided are really the most important from a policy perspective. And I think that's a big improvement from when the incentives were before.
This is why what Adam said gets at why it's so important to have the legislature involved. The courts can only do so much. Having been a judge and later a court master, you're limited by the requirements of the legal system. Whereas the legislature can take initiatives that it has done here that really go beyond what a court can do. With that, I think it's time for some questions. Senator's only here another 10 minutes, so if we could, first set of questions could be addressed, maybe not solely to him, but at least mainly to him, that would be appreciated. And after he goes, you could fire everything you want at any of us here. So just come up to the mic. Just say who you are, which if you want to give your affiliation, fine.
Okay,
If you don't, that's also fine.
sure thing.
Please proceed with your question.
Okay, my name's Jim Crane. I work in the affordable housing field. I got a question for the senator. The question I have is, a lot of the affordable housing that we've done in the state so far, a lot of it has been in terms of obligations here on towns and so forth and so on, which I don't have a problem with. The question I have for you, is there an opportunity for the state to become even more involved? Like, say, start purchasing properties, or competitively go out into the marketplace and assist our nonprofit brethren in terms of getting properties and acquiring properties that way as a more effective means of actually getting to this same kind of thing that we're doing. Is that a possibility? Is basically what I'm saying.
So, first of all, it's a great question. So I'm gonna answer it a couple of different ways. One of the things that we've most recently talked about is the idea that there's a whole host of softer costs that right now through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, developers can't spend money. So like, if you're a developer and you want to be in the affordable housing space for all the right reasons, sort of to get you to the start point where the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which we still have to augment from years and years of taking money from, but you can't use those dollars to help you get to the ready point to get access to capital and go forward. So one of the things that many of us are talking about is changing the design to some degree of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but allocating more money by having a certain set aside for it to do exactly that. Helping those some of those soft costs that gets developers who want to do the right things to the starting point.
Yep.
I can tell you there hasn't been broad discussion around the state becoming a market actor to start purchasing and doing things like that. I know in some other states that has been done and has been considered. A lot of it is about the dollars and cents that we have in the state.
Yeah.
For every dollar, there's 1,000 different people who want us to spend it different ways. So a lot of it is about priorities and principles. As Governor Murphy's time ends in the governorship and whomever comes next, that'll be an open conversation around what will be their housing policy.
Yeah.
Because the foundation, I think, of all good public policy starts with a good housing policy. You don't have good education, you don't have good economic development, you don't have good environmental policy if your housing policy is not up to par.
Yeah.
So we gotta work through some of the nuances of that, but one of the first things is something I'm keenly interested in is utilizing the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, adding more dollars to it, and utilizing some of those soft costs to get developers to the ready point to do more development.
One more question, just way of leaving.
Make it quick, because we've got a bunch of
I
people.
will. Adam, your organization has done quite a lot of work in terms of moving towns into signing agreements and getting things done. Whereas before, when that was underneath the DCA, there wasn't as much of that happening. Can you give us a status update as to where you are with that? Because I think it's like one of these things that people should really know about in terms of how much work you've put into that.
Thanks. Yeah, we've worked with over 350 towns since 2015 to come up with affordable housing plans, and that has led to over 25,000 new affordable homes throughout New Jersey. And if you want to read more, and a lot of partners, making that happen. There's a report we did. The number's a little bit outdated because it's, at this point, the number's almost 2 years old, but on our website called Dismantling Exclusionary Zoning. You can check that out. And there's also a video, you can check it on YouTube, that talks about it with us and Nicole Hannah-Jones and Matt Desmond that we did at Howard University last year.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Peter Madison. I directed the Habitat for Humanity project on Lee Avenue, and I worked with your father, Gil Gordon, as interim director of Habitat Trenton about 20 years ago. And Gil, thank you very much. So my question is, I also at that time or prior to that got involved with Architects Housing in Trenton, and we were looking at developing another project. And we were applying, we had a consultant who was helping us with that, and we applied to or tried to use I believe at that time, HMFA had a program where you could apply for state assistance. I don't recall the specifics of it. But the problem is that the program, to get approved by the HMFA for this program for assistance, you had to meet many requirements that were almost impossible to meet. So you had a huge amount of time to put into making the application, only to be turned down because in essence, there wasn't enough assistance or money from HMFA. So my question to you, Senator, is what state assistance is going to be available without going through all this bureaucratic issues that become overwhelming to potential affordable housing developers?
I wasn't trying to fake you out here. Get this mic on.
Gave you time to think.
Thank you. So first of all, great question, right? Like the bureaucracy is something that stymies development, stymies innovation all throughout. So let me say guilty for the state on behalf of that. I think what we tried to do on behalf of the New Jersey HMFA and the New Jersey EDA for that matter is try and cut through some of that red tape and move it faster along to help projects move forward faster. If there's a specific project that you're still interested in that you like to talk about, perhaps we can talk about that very specific project. But at the end of the day, this is the struggle. I don't know if struggle is the right word, but when you have 3 different branches of government and you want to manage that process, as a legislators, we come up with this great policy idea, and the implementers on the executive branch always don't move at the same pace that we would like. So if there's your specific project, let's spend some time to talk about that. Because I'd welcome to try and figure out if we can help navigate that sort of Byzantine empire that is state government and try and figure out a way to help you out. And I'll say this because I don't want to miss it before I leave. If for some reason there's a question that's specific for me, because I do have to get ready to run, my email address is literally SEN, which is every senator's SEN. My last name is Singleton, which is SINGLETON, and it's at njleg.org. Now, if you'd rather not do that, you'd rather just pick up a phone and call me, my phone number is 856-234-2790.
That again?
My phone number is 856-234-2790. If for some reason, and I can stick for maybe 1 or 2 more, but if I don't get a chance to answer your question, please email or call us and we'll try and get you a specific answer. But sir, please send me the specific project stuff and I'll have a conversation with our HMFA folks.
All right, well, I have a project that I'm thinking of, which anyone in Princeton should be supporting or trying to. And that is, and Valerie, please, I hope you can get involved in this. The town has proposed to spend $49 million to buy the choir college. The rear of that site has a large amount of land, parking space, and dormitories that are no longer functional. That property, perhaps through a land trust arrangement, would be a very good site and a large site close to town for an affordable housing project. And we need to push our Princeton Town Council to start thinking that way. And that could bring costs down. Thank you very much. I appreciate
That's
it.
a great point. I keep thinking opportunity like that was missed in Hopewell Borough with the St. Michael's Preserve, where some of it could have been devoted to affordable housing. So hopefully this opportunity will come to fruition.
Hi there.
Okay, next.
Want to thank you for holding this very important event. I found out about it only today. I just want to really get right to it because I know your time is valuable and you're about to leave. I'm currently homeless. I never expected to be that way. I'm seeing disproportionately women of color, literally here in Princeton, who seem to be displaced. It could be a number of issues, mental health, maybe drug, alcohol, I have no idea. In my case, I left a place that was just simply substandard. After months of begging the landlord for heating during the winter, my mailbox key 4 months later, he only turned up with it after the court brought us both in for unpaid rent, to be very quite frank with you. But after the push and pull of that, and it was contingent upon rental assistance. And I will say DCA was fantastic in the beginning during COVID. Great, they helped so many people navigate from that. But I can't get anybody on the phone now after COVID. And I think it's a disgrace. The referral to that apartment was from Trenton Housing. and I won't mention the specific person's name because I think they were doing it in good faith to refer me to them. But it seemed like there's something wrong here. We have an overlap of all of these organizations. They all say they're doing wonderful things. They're all here to congratulate you, which they should be, about the efforts that we're doing to move this very important subject along. But with all these organizations, with all due respect, there are people like myself who are still homeless on the street. I have been homeless since April 30th. I'm willing to work. I'm willing to do my fair share. I'm still applying for jobs. That's another thing, by the way. I don't know how we're going to bridge that gap between paying for rent and being offered, maybe $15 an hour. It seems like to me, there's a gap here. But with all due respect, it seems like we have so many organizations, they have these great missions and these initiatives, but I just can't seem to find housing right now. And I just maybe hope if you're, maybe to quickly able to address that. I did call 211. They are supposed to be emergent housing, and they sent me to a motel that was ridden with bed bugs and roaches. So this is the reality of what's really going on behind the scenes. And I applaud you to do more. But what I want to say is those people who have their feet on the ground, who are dealing with it day to day, it's really not the glamorous story that we're reading about in the magazines.
So I would answer that your question about thank you for your candor.
People on Zoom, I got your phone number. Somebody else who wants your email address again.
Let me answer this question and I'll deal with it. Thank you. So I'm not as familiar with the Mercer County Housing Emergency Assistance stuff, but what I'd like you to do is that Connie knows that well, but I want you to, Jennifer, maybe give her one of our cards. The DCA thing we can figure out. Like we did, that's what we do every day. We call DCA and it shouldn't have to be this way, but they do take my call. So it makes it a lot easier for us to sort of work through those issues on behalf of people. I think you point out a very real thing, like affordability in our state and our country is a huge challenge. It is something that there's no policymaker who's been able to solve that Rubik's Cube of how we do it the right way. And that is the dichotomy of what you're talking about. Someone who could be gainfully employed and not and still be homeless, or someone who could be making minimum wage or slightly above minimum wage and living in their car. We've dealt with those situations, frankly. And that affordability challenge still remains. I wish I had a good answer for you there, but I don't believe in BS and people, and I don't, and that's why I apologize. But the first thing that we can do on that assistance part that you talked about, we can definitely get the DCA on the phone. We can work through that. We do that every day on behalf of people who are needing their housing component. I don't know the connection here in Mercer, but I know my friend at the microphone does. So I'm gonna cede the mic to her because I think she will be able to talk to you about some very specific Mercer County things, whether at this point or before we're done. I think she'll be able to help you there. And again, to my email address, because that was a question, it is SENGLETON@itisInNancy.org. My friends, I apologize that I have to run, but it's been my honor and privilege to be with you this evening. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Senator, for an amazing appearance and discussion here, and also for your very humane offer of help. It's not just policy. Absolutely.
Senator
Thank you.
Singleton, before you leave, one very quick comment for you and for Adam. As I expected, the two of you didn't quite present what actually happened in this process. You made it sound easy. It wasn't easy. The only way we got this landmark legislation through was because of your smarts and your fight and your courage. And Adam, because your mom is here, I have to say loud and clear that I watched you walk the halls. I watched the incredibly smart way that you navigated things. And I am in awe and forever grateful for the work that the two of you gentlemen did in that last session. The difference.
Can I? Can I, you know, whatever, that work?
See the light and then it goes away.
All right, I'm just gonna speak loudly, hopefully that works. I don't know, is this working? No? That work? All right, you got it. I also wanted to follow up on the last question, ma'am. So what you said, first of all, I mean, we are both producing more affordable homes than we have in decades and far less than we need. And what, part of what we're doing, in addition to having done all the work to get 25,000 affordable homes built, is to keep doing more work to get more built. But I also know, I mean, in the work we're doing, like, what we're hearing is, you know, from people like you all the time. I mean, we got 29 apartments that opened up in Cherry Hill near our offices. Over 9,000 people applied for them. And so, you know, it is a win, and I think we have to celebrate the wins that we get, the 29 apartments, and we also have to be real about the fact that it's a drop in the bucket compared to what the need is. I hope, Connie, are you gonna be able to provide also some resource? Connie Mercer knows more than anyone else about resources in Mercer County. And so I hope that they'll connect in addition to the center connecting. I also was wondering, is anyone here from Housing Initiative of Princeton? Have you ever connected? Okay, there we go. And so, I don't know if you've been able to connect with them at all.
Contact them via online, because everything starts with the online application process.
Yeah.
And then you have an affordable waiting list. And depending on the county, can I just throw out this one example? Weehawken has a 20-year waiting time period if you want to be a part of them and you are a non-resident. I did know that there was a waiting period. I just don't want to wait 20 years.
Yeah. Well, so very locally, I'm glad to see somebody is here from Housing Initiatives of Princeton who might be able to say some, you want to?
I'll try to say something to that. I mean, we do have a part of the Housing Initiatives of Princeton. We have a component that is transitional housing, and we also have something that we call eviction prevention program, which we used to call rental assistance.
EPP, yeah.
Yeah, so it would be going through that. Are you
I don't have housing. So the EPP would be if you're in housing and you're trying to avoid eviction, right?
For them, well, there is a component of that is for a security deposit. So we work with other housing coalition and could potentially be helpful. I don't want to. Yeah, and I feel like another one of these well-intentioned people who doesn't have a good answer for you, and that's just the state of affairs. Yeah.
So why do you think that is? Let's be very honest, because we have all of these organizations that are, and in county, I want to thank you because I see your name on Homefront and I go there. And it's such an honor to see her in person. But I'm just wondering, like, you have so many organizations and they're all making the same effort, but we've got all these people who are struggling, one, to pay the rent, or two, to even get into housing that's affordable.
Yeah. So,
Because there isn't
can
the
I hype up?
political will to fix it.
Right.
We know how to fix it. We have the technology, we have the answers, we know how to do it. But there isn't the support, political will to fix it. That's
Okay, let's,
why.
being fair to everybody, let's get on to the next question if we can.
I think you have a question.
Okay, let's have the next question. And we have questions coming online too, so we need to we've got about another half hour and we've got to reach as many questions as we can.
First of all, thank you all. And my question is, in the affordable housing statute, are there any guardrails to ensure that historically marginalized communities are given preference across all the towns, not just in their towns? Especially African Americans in Princeton, we've seen they dwindled from 20% to 6%, and we need to understand.
Need the assistance or?
No.
I hope you're okay, and it's a great question, and I'll give you two different answers about it. One is that one of the things that we haven't talked about that the law does and that we're working really hard on is requires the state to update the rules around how affordable housing is marketed, you know, how lotteries are run, all those kinds of things. In ways that, to a degree, should help in getting more outreach to historically marginalized communities and communities of color. The other answer, though, which is also linked to the last question, is that, you know, we are also hemmed in by a federal government and federal court system that has made deeply unjust decisions and rulings in making it much more challenging to actually do the things that we should be doing to actually give those kinds of and so I think that we will improve that with some of these other provisions of the new law to a degree, and not to the degree that I think justice requires. And I mean, to the broader question about like why aren't we doing all this stuff? Part of it is that the federal government used to invest tremendous amounts of money in creating public housing and creating other affordable housing. It was basically zeroed out effectively under Ronald Reagan, and no president under either party has done a thing since. And we are all operating in an environment in which there are too few resources and systemic underinvestment in housing that has been going on 40 plus years.
That's when you consider it's been 40 years since the federal government actively funded new affordable housing. 40 years with no prospect of a change in sight. It seems like definitely one of the goals has to be to revive what we knew how to do at one point. We did it to the tune of hundreds of thousands of units a year, even during the Democrat and Republican administrations. So I think one lesson to take from what Adam said is there has to be a movement to get the federal government back in the housing business. It's not the only answer, but it's certainly one answer. Sorry.
Hi again, Tom Pinio from the Housing Initiatives of Princeton. I'm confident that I will go to my grave incapable of explaining the theory of relativity, the infield fly rule, and how housing numbers obligations are established. I'm not going to ask for a full explanation of any of those. I'm curious.
You can do the info fly rule for you.
Okay. I'm curious if there is a transitional housing, wearing my HIP, Housing Initiative of Princeton hat, if there is a transitional housing component of this. I know that is something, speaking to this woman especially here right now, that it's not just about long-term affordable, deed restricted affordable housing. There are other needs, and that's part of the answer to your question, that certain groups are working on certain parts of the problem. So the question is there a transitional housing component?
Yes, the bill specifically does speak to transitional housing component, and allows there to be credit for that. Yes, that's something that I know Connie worked very hard on, and so that is one of the options that towns have to meet their obligation.
Great, thank you.
Hi, good evening. First, thank you for being here. This is a very informational discussion. Leighton Newland, Birch Avenue here in Princeton, New Jersey. I just want to make, for background, the Mount Laurel decision was made because of a lack of diversity in the town. And no diversity or attempt to have diversity in sight. Princeton is a very unique community. In 2010, we had a revaluation, and the historically African-American community of the Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood began pretty much a mass exodus of home ownership out of Princeton. The African-Americans who left their homes sold not to, or left there not to generational wealth, but to others. So now the African-American population in Princeton is a mere 5%, and home ownership is significantly less than that. And my question and my dilemma and my concern is that Mount Laurel was done to create more diversity, to create more inclusion, to create greater equity. And in Princeton, it has done exactly the opposite. And my question really is, has there been any thought on the legislature, and I'm going to get with Senator Singleton later, but for Fair Share to take a look at individual municipalities and their individual needs, because one size does not fit all. And since Princeton is void of many African Americans and people of color because of the market forces, have you given any thought to leaning into municipalities like Princeton and others that don't really benefit by the building necessarily of affordable units until you take a real hard look at not only what's being built, but who's occupying the units once they are built? Because what I don't want to do is to take a look back here in Princeton 10 years from now and find out that we built 1,500, 2,000 affordable housing units and we're less diverse than when we started. Because something's really wrong about that. And my issue is the developers build the houses, and what ammunition do you really give the municipalities at the municipal level to see to it that when these houses are filled, that there's the right level of diversity there? That's the first part of my question. The second part is really a doozy. And that is, in round 4, have you ever thought that maybe we would take a look at not just building affordable new units, but taking a look at all of the cities in the towns of the state of New Jersey that have public housing units? How about rehabilitating them and giving them credits in round 4, round 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10? That's my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, they're great questions. I mean, first of all, you can get credit for rehabilitating public housing units. I think that, and so I think that would be a great thing to work on. I mean, a lot of the flip side of what the senator was saying before, right, of saying that towns have a lot of options about what to do, is that towns also have a lot of options. I would say not all towns necessarily select the optimal options of what they do with those options. And I think that there's a lot, and I think a lot of the things that you're talking about, you know, require more thought and more effort than just having developer come in and do 20%. I mean, there's a lot of things that actually can get credit towards round 4. Several of which were expanded in the bill, but that really require a lot of work and effort, which we'd be happy to work on. So, for example, I mean, when I think about Witherspoon-Jackson, I'm very familiar with. I mean, I think about things like a land trust, which you could do and get credit for. I think about things like creating a homeownership program that has a first generation focus, which you could get credit for, and which we fought for the state to do and to credit. And so I think a lot of those options on the table. I think the challenge is really figuring out how to implement it and the capacity to implement it. I think historically in Princeton, you know, there are some great accomplishments, like some of the stuff that Valerie talks about historically. And there's also been periods in Princeton in which basically there's been ignorance of those requirements. And in my experience, what happens when towns ignore the requirements is that it comes back to bite them, and they don't actually make nuanced policy and decide to do things in a way that is optimal. I mean, for those of you who don't know, you know, Princeton was the last town in Mercer County to reach a settlement. And I look at some of the other towns that are around Princeton, and you know, there was actually this funny moment. I don't know if you saw this or in office then. I can't remember exactly when it was, but like there was some kind of thing on Twitter. Hamilton was one of the first towns to settle, and there was someone on Twitter who said to like the council person in Hamilton, you know, what can you teach Princeton about how to be progressive? Which the council like really took up and ran with. But the reality is, if you look at a community like Hamilton, they've done a lot in working with Homefront and doing things that are more about supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness, and doing more about renovating their older affordable housing stock than Princeton has. And they've done it, and they've gotten credit for it, and they've gotten their plan approved, and they did it a lot easier than Princeton did last time. And so I would love to work with you and other people in Princeton to figure out how we do it. It requires really more of thought and affirmative effort up front, because as you're rightly pointing out, it's swimming against the market forces, right? I mean, I think that, you know, all the things I'm talking about, things like land trusts, even things like what, you know, what Princeton Community Housing has been doing is more about creating an alternative to how the market works, and the way in which the market works most destructive, in my view, in neighborhoods like Witherspoon Jackson. And we see that all over the state. You know, we've done a lot of work suing developers in Hoboken, for example. And Hoboken's unrecognizable from what it was decades ago. And it's because you've had developers who've gotten away without doing any affordable housing at all. I do think there's a lot of developers who are breaking the law in terms of how they market units. And one of the things, as I mentioned before, is that we are really trying to work with HMFA to tighten up that law, make it clear. You know, there's a loophole in the law. Some developers claim that they read a law that says that you have to have a lottery to say that they don't have to have a lottery, and that they can just open up applications and people can know about them and come first. And I think that's going to be very clearly changed going forward. But you know, so I would love to work with you and other people in Princeton about how we do this better, because I think a lot of the things that you're saying are things that legally that towns can do, and I've seen other towns do it, but it requires an active policy choice that is how they want to do it.
You know, Adam, what you're describing requires a lot of monitoring. And I think it may be worthwhile to discuss for a few minutes. The towns are supposed to come up with numbers in January, and plans which have to be publicly adopted after public input in July. So maybe you'd like to comment, Valerie, too, on what the opportunities would be for people in this room who are raising these issues to question the plans that are put forward, not just Princeton, but anywhere in the state, and say, you're not skewed in the right direction. This is going to cause further diminution of at least ethnic diversity in our town. So I think there are opportunities for public input, but why don't you comment on that, Adam?
Or Valerie.
Or Valerie.
I'm gonna have to work this thing, make this thing work, and then take a little change. All right,
We should
now
just stop
it's
turning it
not
off, so it's working.
Okay, it's not working now, no?
Oh,
This one.
We got a hot mic here.
Okay, all right. Well, I think one of the things that happened in Princeton the last time was that the town was in litigation. And because it was in litigation, there was no public discussion of what was going on. So the plan was developed in a closed room without a lot of public input. And then, you know, when it appeared, people had a very limited amount of time to react to it. And there was some reaction, and there were a few changes made, but there was not very much. And that's, you know, public input is hard. It's, you know, it can be a very difficult process to go through, but I think you're always better off if people understand how you got to a decision. Even though it may not be the perfect decision in that person's mind, at least if they see what your alternatives were and how you chose to do what you finally end up doing, you're better off in the long run. But that's really hard work. I won't dispute that. But, you know, what do you think, Adam?
I mean, I think actively engaging in the process and bringing up ideas. I don't know who's the person who said before, who talked about like using the choir college. You know, I have no idea if the details of that's realistic, but you know, there's next year is the year where this is all gonna happen. And being vocal starting now about what are the priorities and what, because it really is the case that there's a lot of different ways towns can meet this obligation, and that's based on this general idea that's been the case sort of pretty much ever since the start of Mount Laurel, that, okay, towns are gonna have to do this, but they know best about how they should do it themselves. And, you know, I think that there's ways that that can be used for good, like the examples I was giving in Hamilton, of them doing things that really address critical housing needs, preserve the existing housing stock. And there's examples of that really not going well. And so, you know, now is really the time to be advocating and looking at those opportunities. And I do think a general thread, I mean, what's interesting about the choir college example is that, you know, when there's publicly owned land, whether it's public housing, whether it is, you know, something like you talk about surplus municipal property, right? Whether it's potentially the choir college, you have a lot more control over what you do with it. And, you know, those are really important opportunities. And I really think that, I mean, we've seen some really incredible things. I mean, Robbinsville, for example, they did something incredible. They took this, Mercer Mobile Home Park on Route 130. It was owned by a private equity company. I worked with the mayor and the town to try to negotiate with them to have them, because they were running it into the ground. I think they wanted to kick everyone out and redevelop it. And we worked with the mayor to try to first negotiate with them. And when they basically refused, the town actually took it by eminent domain, and it's publicly owned now. And I think that is really a pretty incredible example. They poured a lot of money into fixing the problems there and making it livable again. And, you know, that kind of like manufactured housing really reaches people who are really pretty low incomes. And, you know, I mean, that is something that requires a lot of effort and planning, but I think part of that started, I know part of it started by the mayor. I mean, residents were showing up and saying, we need to do something about our community. This private equity company is, you know, is running it into the ground. And that's what led to them thinking about incorporating it into their affordable housing plan that way. And now it's time to be doing that.
All right. Last but not least, Evan Anderson. In my view, it should be relatively easy to achieve and even exceed our numbers, including in Princeton. And we have the space, even in Princeton, believe it or not, and we have developers willing to build. And hopefully many of those are nonprofits too. What I think needs to be discussed more, and I'm curious your thoughts on, is reasons why it's difficult moving forward. And that is, you know, there is a sizable public opposition in all towns, in most towns, and there's exclusionary zoning. So how do we, you know, keep the momentum going forward? Even with the new law, it's I believe it's going to be an ongoing challenge. Thank you.
Very good point. How do we keep the pressure on? That's what you're saying. You don't come to this meeting and then go home and say, gee, it was a great meeting, or maybe it wasn't such a great meeting. But this is a constant effort. And with that, I will, we have one question here that asks how the numbers were derived and how you assure diversity of income. I think that's covered in the statute, but maybe Adam or Valerie want to comment on that. And the other question I'd like to leave Because if you get involved in this process and there are disputes, what does the law say about how these disputes are resolved? So if you show up at a hearing because you don't like the plan, because it doesn't cater the interest that you're trying to further in a particular town, what's your recourse? So I just throw that out to the both of you, both questions. What's in the statute about the numbers and the income diversity? And what can you do if you find yourself at a hearing and you're not getting listened to?
The statute very specifically says, and actually strengthens what the law was before, about the percentage of, it's basically 3 tiers of incomes, which are called very low, low, and moderate. 13% of the housing has to be for very low as a minimum, 30%, 7% for low, and 50% for moderate. The reality of these numbers is that, in my view, far too little of it is for very, very low income people. There is, and that goes back to something I was saying before about, for a very low income family, which is, somebody often in the family often making like $25,000, $30,000 a year or less. It is very hard without there being significant public money in order to create that housing. And we don't have much of that money. I mean, in the last few years, the state has invested more money in affordable housing creation and preservation than it has in generations. And one of the things we fought for is to make sure that every single time it did so, there was a reservation for housing for people experiencing homelessness and for very low income housing, and it's still not even close to enough. So, it's set forth in there's these minimum requirements. I would hope that towns like Princeton figure out ways to go beyond some of those minimums. In terms of the process, right? So there is, first there's a public process at the local level, and that is going to be really, the most important date for that is June 30th. Towns have to submit a preliminary plan by June 30th, and that's a public process. And so engaging between now and June 30th on that is really important. And after that, there's also a legal process where if anyone is dissatisfied with the plans that are presented, they can file an objection by August 31st, and then there's a mediation process to resolve that and litigation if that doesn't work. There's also a sooner process about the number. I expect there being more disputes over the plan than about the number, but towns have to basically either accept TCA's numbers, or what the senator was talking about before, or show their own calculations consistent with the statute by January 31st. So all happening next year. There's this concept of rounds that happens every 10 years and 2025 is the start of the next round. So that's why it's such a critical year.
So if I hear you right, Adam, sometime before the end of June, there has to be public hearings adopting a plan, and that's a chance for public input. And then either in July or August, if you don't like what's in the plan, because it doesn't meet some of the needs that have been described here, you have the chance to file an objection, which then has to be resolved through a dispute resolution process that's specifically set up in the statute with litigation as a backup. So those are your marching orders for the fall, for the spring, and the summer.
Yeah, I just want to underline that because I think that's one of the most significant aspects of this new modifications to the law is that the legislature has basically said, we're going to get it done this time. The last round ended up being 26 years long, which is insane. But it's what can happen if we take our eye off the ball and if we don't push. And last time it got bogged down in the courts. There were any number of court suits on various details and things, and Fair Share kept going back to court and saying the plan you've come up with doesn't meet the law, and the courts eventually said Yeah, that's true, but it took them 2 or 3 years or more every single time, and that's how it ended up taking so long. So this time, we all really have to pay attention. We have to know that these deadlines are coming up, and we have to be, get up and be heard. Make yourself heard this time. Our voices are important because if you're sitting up on the dais at some council somewhere in New Jersey and nobody comes up and says, I really care about having more affordable housing in my town. I don't like the way things are going. Nobody's moving in except people who have trust funds. What's happening here? It's not the way this town was when I moved here, and it's not what I want for my town. You've got to say that. Somebody has to get up and say that. And I hope all of you will do it because, one person isn't enough. It has to be an outcry. So that's my preaching for the night.
Very important. I was arguing a case in the Supreme Court about the builder's remedy, and at that point, unbeknownst fortunately to my constituents, I was in favor of the builder's remedy. And I was intended to tell the court, I'm waiting for it to come up and say, Mayor Bucksbaum, can we have more affordable housing in our town? And that's really important, what Valerie just said. Being there and, what's called YIMBY, yes in my backyard. That's critically important as we go forward, because none of these processes are self-executing. They don't happen by themselves. Adam's got one organization, there are others, but the organizations can't carry the load on their own. So it's people who are interested enough to come out today. You all have a task list for this next 8 months. And with that, I'll call on for a question.
Yeah. Recently in Maryland and in North Jersey, I was talking to people who felt like were involved in things where affordable housing was partly involved, but it was also developers kind of wanting to really make a lot of money. And I just wondered, how does the law have room to balance those kinds of things? How do you know that the affordable housing is serving the people, serving the community, and not serving the developers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we, especially because the federal government doesn't put any money into this practically, we have a system in which housing is being created, is largely created by developers. And so the balance is that in many cases that, and there's lots of great nonprofit developers, right, who are not looking, they are looking to make money in terms of being able to operate what they're doing, but, it also is because they rely on subsidies and there's only so much. The reality is, unless you deal with developers, then you're not going to get very much housing built. I guess the other thing I'd say is that we overall, there's just, there's such an overall housing supply shortage that if you don't also have some amount of housing that isn't affordable housing, I think that is part of what ends up driving up costs in places like Witherspoon Jackson, is that, I know, and Mayor Baraka in Newark, who we keynote address at an event we did last year, talks about how this has impacted Newark, is that if you're in Milburn and you're not building anything, and West Orange just built stuff, so I won't say that, but if you're in Milburn and you're not building anything, and towns in Morris County, you're not building anything, what he's seeing is that you have all these people who are now coming into Newark, not necessarily because, that is their first choice, but because they grew up in Milburn, they can't afford to live in Milburn anymore. And so now they're coming into Newark and paying prices. Newark recently had its first $1 million house ever, and that is driving out people who have lived in Newark forever. And so if you're in a lot of those communities, if you're not building kind of the middle market rate housing, that is part of what is also driving displacement. I think communities also have to be able to deal with developers in a way that prioritizes, that realizes that we don't have enough money, especially from federal sources, to build housing, but also sets key community priorities around what you want from developers. I think that's true around things like design. I think it's a lot, there's a lot of things, actually, this is stuff that we're really pushing on now. Yeah, we see developers they've put the affordable housing on the side, made them smaller units, stuff like that. Again, that's all stuff that the bill sets up a new regulatory process around, and that is a lot of the work we're really doing right now is to push on standards to change around that. But I also think the reality is that, for better or for worse, I would argue in many ways for worse, in my view of things, the way that the housing market works in America is largely reliant on for-profit developers, and so dealing with them is part of the way of doing it. And I think some communities do a better job of it than others, and it goes back to some of the stuff we were talking about before. I think the communities that spend years fighting this out in court, and that, as Princeton did, and then end up having to come up with a plan really quickly. And I know that's before a lot of the current people on the council run the council. I mean, that is always, in my experience, what leads to the worst results. And the towns that proactively plan, and really work on things in a way that they start off and say, we're going to do this, but hey, if you want to do this, we're going to actually require of you X, Y, and Z, and have it as a negotiation, do a lot better.
There was one question in the chat which related to how the numbers were derived and the income diversity, and I think Adam answered that one. I'll just ask Lori, are there anything else in the chat that we need to? Okay, well, I think the moment is now. All right, did you want to follow?
George, thank you so much. It's a pleasure again to bring this in front of your distinguished panel. I'm just brought up here because you mentioned Newark Ras Baraka. I actually grew up on the same block with Ras Baraka, and I really want to just make more of a comment rather than a question. It really seems to me that these leaders have to be just transparent and held accountable for their various jurisdictions. In my case, I'm gonna just be very blunt. It's more than just not being able to afford the apartment and all of the other things that I discussed, but I really think that there was a retaliatory effort made because of some allegations that I made against the state. And I cannot stand here and not address that, which I won't go into, but I love my family and I love my brother. And I hope Ras Baraka is listening to this message, or will get this. You will be held accountable. I think we have for far too long accepted corruption and cronyism and all kinds of stuff, which you sort of briefly didn't or was nice enough not to address under the Christie administration. But this carried on, and it's time that we have leadership that's held accountable. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And I must say, in the honor of political honesty, the administration prior to the Christie administration did not exactly cover itself with glory on this issue. So this is, that makes what the senator came up with and Governor Murphy came up with that much more remarkable. With that, I think since this is 3 synagogues and I'm not a rabbi, why don't we take a moment of silence and do our call it a self-benediction, and we'll reflect for a moment of silence on what we've heard and what we might think about Tilly. So let's just go into ourselves for a few minutes, few moments. Okay. We still can be quiet. We just proved it. Thank you to so many people here, and we understand this. Thank you, Dr. Thank you to the Sandlot Partners for Kaya, Sinai, and the Jewish Center, particularly the Jewish Center for hosting this. And thank you to all of you. And hopefully we'll get something out of it. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you to Valerie and to Adam and of course the Senator of Singleton. Thank you very much, Lori. You keep it started.